In 2020, we are going to be celebrating the 35th year of the journal. It was founded in 1985 by Leslie Price, who's with us today. And for the next following 3 or 4 years, Leslie was the founder editor of the journal. This was not his first attempt at starting a journal, however. His experience, I believe, began with a Christian parapsychologist, which I'm not sure if it's still being published today.
It's still being published today, and it's edited by Dr. Robert Gilbert.
Oh, Dr.
And
Gilbert.
Dr. Robert Gilbert, yourself and I are among the survivors of the first Theosophical History Conference of 1986.
Yes, correct. So that's the founding. So Leslie has been around for about 45 years, either founding journals or doing other things that are related to theosophical history. He was not alone, and I wanted to mention one other person who was significant, and that was Margaret Bryce Smith, a lady who was in her 90s, who helped to support the origin of the journal. And she provided financial aid not only to theosophical history, but as I understand, also to Christian parapsychologists. So she and a number of other people connected with the Christian parapsychologist helped Leslie begin the journal, whose first issue came out in January of 1985. Now, there were other people who were involved. One was the General Secretary of the Theosophical Society, Lillian Story, the genealogist who discovered the true birth of C.W. Leadbeater. And it was she who passed it on to Gregory Tillett in his book, The Elder Brother. Another person who was involved from the beginning was Jean Overton Fuller, who herself was working on a biography of Blavatsky around the mid-'80s or so. It came out shortly thereafter. A person who we're going to speak about today also was involved from the earliest times, K. Paul Johnson, The Masters Revealed, or In Search of the Masters, whichever book that you've looked at by him. Robert Elwood, who is currently at Crotona, past professor at USC, University of Southern California, and one of the experts on new religious movements. He was involved from the very beginning. I learned about the journal and Leslie through Robert Elwood. And so I was an original subscriber, as was Robert, and a few others as well. I think K. Paul Johnson was originally a subscriber. And there were other people who were involved at the beginning. Jocelyn Godwin, a name who you might know, and then also a lawyer who did some excellent work on Pascal Beverly Randolph, John Patrick Devaney. And he was, from an early period, involved with the interest of the journal. Another person from Sorbonne, Antoine Fevre, was very much involved. I remember Antoine from 1986 when he was working on his Currents and Notions. He showed me a paper that he was working on when he was at Berkeley, and this was the first time that I've come into contact with that particular approach to Western esotericism. So he was very much part of this movement as well. Now, this was very fortunate because this was about 100 years after the SPR report of 1885. Leslie was trying to reintroduce an examination of that report and to suggest that there were some problems with it. And so he was, as a member of the archives of the SPR, he did some very good work in that area, and he published some of his findings in the early issues. By the way, for those of you who know the Theosophical History website, it's theohistory.org, Volume 1 is available. The very first 8 issues are online. And one of these days, I hope to put the rest of the volumes online as well. Leslie worked originally on some material in the SPR archives, one of them being the Stack Memorandum. And that appeared in the very first issue. John Herbert Stack was one of the members of the committee investigating phenomena connected to the Theosophical Society. That's mentioned, by the way, in the old diary leaves. And there was a preliminary report. One of the things that was deleted from that report were the so-called bell sounds that Blavatsky produced. We might call them astral bells. And Stack decided to delete this from the appendix in the SPR report. Also, the appendix 20 was deleted as well. So these findings give us an example of what I consider deep history. In other words, going into the records that are the foundation of our conclusions of historical events. And so this is what Leslie worked on and concentrated on for the first couple of years. And it was very fortunate that he was working with the SPR because there was some good material that was hitherto unknown at the time. He was working at the same time that there were other individuals working on this. Walter Carithers, for instance, worked on his Hodgson report and, of course, deeply criticized it. There were other historical accounts besides Carithers. Michael Gomes, a very early supporter of Theosophical history, and probably most of you know of his work in the works of Blavatsky, her transactions, the secret doctrine, the Isis unveiled. All of these works he reduced down to a workable level. In 1987, he came out with his book on the history of the early Theosophical Society and the foundations. So we have a number of these things going on. Leslie was working in England, Michael Gomes in America. There were other studies taking place, Walter Carithers in California, and a few other individuals involved. Now, at the same time, the question arose, what kind of a journal should Theosophical history be? And we've written about this, both Leslie and I, in the past, and I want to stress a few things, and this is something that I would like to continue when I'm gone. If anybody decides to take over, this is what I would like to see. Leslie was very much adamant that the journal should be neutral, that it should be independent of any society, that its neutrality should be sympathetic. In other words, we're not here to criticize. We're here just to report about the history of the society. Not to look at it in a favorable or an antagonistic tone, but a neutral tone. And then finally, Theosophical history is primarily a history journal, not a theosophical journal. This is something that even it took a while to realize that this was the most important way of looking at it, because it is the methodology that underlies this journal. The topic happens to be theology, or theosophy, I should say, but not necessarily the history itself. So, there is a quotation that does not come from Theosophical history, but from the pages of The Eclectic Theosophist by Emmett Small. And it was in that journal in 1989 that Leslie wrote this, and I thought it was very significant. We are a history journal, and we print significant historical material. CWL, that's Leadbeater, is a big part of TS history, just as Trotsky, say, is part of modern Russian history. Ironically, there are people in the Adyar Society who agree that Leadbeater's views on 5-foot Martians should be concealed. Hence the omission of the section from the Quest edition. Now this goes back to a discussion about the publication of theosophical texts and the selected editing without notification of what was taken out of these books. And not generally well known to most people was that there was, in the very last issue, an article by Greg Tillett seriously criticizing this action on the part of the Theosophical Society in America, because they were the primary publishers. So again, Leslie followed on the footsteps of Greg, or vice versa. I don't know who started this, but it was something that they both agreed on very much. Now, at the same time in England, when the journal was being developed and published, in America, there were things going on as well. At the American Academy of Religion, for instance, there was a section or group which was concerned primarily with Western esotericism, which met an unfortunate end because there were two wings of that group, one perennialist, one theosophist, and this led to a split. After that, fortunately, I was successful in starting a theosophy section in the 1990s at the AAR, and it lasted for about 3 or 4 years. So in that seminar, the Theosophy seminar, we had speakers like Antoine Favre coming and giving annual talks. So those are some of the background. In 1990, I took over from Leslie. Leslie had to give up his editorship in 1989. And during a period, if you recall, April was the last issue in 1989. And we were wondering in America, well, what happened to the July issue and the September issue? They did not come out. In the meantime, and this is something not generally known, John Cooper, the person who was working on the Blavatsky letters at the time, he was collecting them for his thesis at Sydney University, came to America, as well as other countries, in search of the Blavatsky letters. Sometime in 1989, towards the end, I met with John in the library of the Theosophical Society in Pasadena. That's the rival society, not the Adyar Society, but the Tingley Society. And it was John who asked me, would I like to be editor? And that was the furthest thing from my mind. And I told him, I said, I'll think about it. And after a while, I think I agreed. And then Leslie and I got together and tried to have a very amicable trade-off and to continue this. I started with the January 1990 issue, and that has been going on now for almost 30 years. Some little things that come to my mind as I think back. One was, at the time, I was working on the editor Henry Stokes, who was the editor of the OE Library Critic. And I never thought about it until recently. But Stokes was editor for 30 years. I just hit that, or pretty close to it. We're a little bit different in personality, however. For any of you who know Henry Stokes, he was very caustic, very critical. This is what he was known for. But the one thing that concerned me was that once he gave it up in 1942, nobody took over. Nobody could take over from his journal. There was only one Stokes, and that was it. Nobody could actually carry on with his personality. With Theosophical History, and this is where I'm starting to lead into now the future, there is every possibility that it can continue, because this is not based upon the personality of the editor. It is based upon the methodology that we want to adopt. And when I adopted it, I used a different expression to get at what Leslie was talking about. I used a term that Husserl used, and that was epoché. And that simply meant to suspend one's normative judgment about the topic that is under investigation, and it's the refusal to pronounce the truth claims of whatever religion is investigated. And that is basically the technique that is used in Western esotericism. Different labels are used for that, but it comes out to about the same thing. So that is where we're at. That is what I am looking to pass on to whoever wants to take this journal once I give it up. When I first took it over, there were some problems that we've had, the logistics, obviously. Robert Elwood was a great help from USC. And also another person who actually helped me print up the first issue, and that was J. Gordon Melton, who was the expert in new religious movements. He's currently at Baylor University now, and he had a fantastic collection at the time at Santa Barbara of books on just about every new religious movement that there is. And by the way, in California, we're very fortunate because every religion in the world is represented in that state. So when I started to teach new religious movements, it wasn't very difficult. I would just go down the street and there was the BOTA, or up the road there was self-realization, all sorts of things. I mean, there were about 2,000 religions that are represented. So that is the beginning. It was with the help of selected individuals. Besides J. Gordon Melton, there was Jerry Hedger Akins. Some of you may know him. He is the curator of the Turlock Alexandria West archives. He helped me print up the journal in the early years, and was a great help, and still is, by the way. So I really appreciate all the help that he gave me. And of course, the family got involved. My daughter and son helped to fill the envelopes, and even my mother-in-law helped me, and my wife. My mother-in-law now is 100 years old, and she was stuffing those envelopes. So whenever you get these, part of it is due to the work of others. Now, what is it that we've printed? Along the way, there was a little bit of a disagreement that came up, a friendly disagreement between John Cooper and I. John wanted to have the journal concentrate only on the society, and I wanted to concentrate more on the movement. So in other words, if something came up with other sections, with the, for instance, the Church Universal and Triumphant, with Swedenborg, all of those other movements were theosophically oriented, but not necessarily theosophical in name. And I wanted to include that. And for that reason, I included, for instance, in my description of the journal, spiritualism, Rosicrucianism, the philosophy of Emanuel Swedenborg, pre-Blavatskyite theosophy, and anything else that interested me. It was based upon my own interest, quite honestly. And what I wanted to do was to publish certain things. First of all, I wanted to concentrate on individuals within the society. I wanted to concentrate on movements, also documents, as well as anything else that might be of interest. And that would include, for instance, letters. And we were very fortunate that during the 1990s, the judge letters, those were the letters written by Blavatsky to Judge, were all published as soon as they were released around 1995 or so. So there's a whole story behind the Judge letters. In 2016, we started on the Skinner letters. J. Ralston Skinner, who was an individual that I'll be talking about, by the way, at the European School, was mentioned in the Secret Doctrine more often than anyone else with the exception of Plato. So the question is why? And part of the reason I'll try to give in my paper in a couple of days. So the first letter, the one that has been mentioned many, many times but never published, was Skinner's letter of February 17th, 1887. That was finally published, as I said, about 2 or 3 years ago in the journal. And it took us about 3 or 4 years to prepare it, just to research it. And if ever you have doubts about the breadth and depth of Blavatsky's research, just read the letter. There's so much. It took me months to trace everything that she mentioned. So it was a remarkable letter. It was about 36 pages, typical letters at the time, I think. And she explained a number of things in very great detail. Now, who appears in the journal? Some unusual characters. I've also wanted to concentrate on individuals we did not generally know, such as Rose Alatini, who happened to be the wife of Cyril Scott. We had articles on Cyril Scott, Joseph Bibby, F.T. Brooks, E. Jerry Brown, even a letter of Jerry Brown's. Lady Katniss, Jocelyn Godwin produced that article. Arthur Conger, the great split that took place in 1945 with the T.S. Pasadena, was described. And that was rather controversial because the split came not for the usual reason given, which was the Parkinson's disease of Colonel Conger, the then leader of the Theosophical Society, but because of his claim of being a conduit of the masters, when it was shown that he had no contact with the esoteric section of that society. It's a complicated story, but it's something that came out and created quite a stir. There were also records from the Orange, New Jersey archives of Thomas Edison proving that he was a member of the society. In fact, there were letters that were written to and by him to Olcott and to other members. We also described other theosophically oriented organizations, such as the Paracelsian Order down in Southern California. By Southern, I mean by the border of Mexico. The Green Village, Villaggio Verde. The Solar Temple. The Universal Brotherhood. Now that's something that was a strange organization that puzzled me for about 16 years. And finally the answer came out. I'll get back to that in a moment. But I mentioned to you that California was unique because we represent every religion in the world, but also all the organizations. There was the, where I live, the ULT in Los Angeles, the Central Lodge. There was TS Pasadena, actually it's in Altadena, which is a little next door. There was down about 100 miles away, south in San Diego, Point Loma, the old colony of Madame Tingley. There's Crotona, up by Santa Barbara, and Halcyon, also, the Temple of the People. These are the major organizations. So California was a center of that. So it was a good place to be. Again, a little bit backstory on this. I had a choice of either teaching in California or, believe it or not, Hobart, Tasmania. Where to pick? I picked California. It's a little bit more central. I don't know what's in Hobart, but I was there. It's a beautiful place, but not much there. Okay. A little bit on the Universal Brotherhood. When I was researching Henry Stokes, I came across this, and in fact it was written about by Annie Besant. Beware of the Universal Brotherhood. And I always thought, well, this must be Tingley's organization. But the idea was, why was it looked upon so negatively? Because yes, there was a rivalry involved, but there was something beyond that. So I had no choice. I think in my article I said most likely it's Tingley's organization. However, many years later, 16 years later, Martin Starr, who's currently a subscriber and a person who was researching this, said, no, there's another Universal Brotherhood. And what he was describing was a highly secretive brotherhood, which he discovered while researching the life of Wilfred Talbot Smith, who was a disciple of Aleister Crowley. What is even more interesting is that the Brotherhood had as its members Paul Foster Case. Now this person was the head of the BOTA, Builders of the Adytum, Israel Regardie, the secretary of Aleister Crowley, and the occultist who had connections with the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And also the mathematician, logician involved in magic, C.F. Russell. This was the Universal Brotherhood that was being described in very negative terms by Besant and others. Everyone at the time, around 1913, knew about this, but by the time I came across it, it was lost. There was no explanation. It was assumed that everybody knew what this organization was, but we did not know. Okay. Now, that is what we've done in the past. The question is, what are we doing now? And what is coming up in the future? And that is something that perhaps I could show you rather than talk about it. And let's see. Is there any? I don't know if this is on. I wanted to demonstrate that there are things going on.
Έλα, γιατί το computer δεν δουλεύει και να το μπροστά.
And while we're waiting, I wanted just to add what is inside of the future. Why did I talk about this? It's mainly addressed to those who might be interested in editing a journal after I'm gone. My plans, considering age and all that, I would say not more than 5 years, if I'm lucky. If anybody's interested in taking over, I wanted plenty of time to work with the individual to transfer it over, because I want a smooth transition. I want to make sure that it follows the methodology that we're following, and I want to be sure that this continues. This is one of the few journals that I think has promise of continuing. Most journals, once the editor is gone, that's it. I don't want to see this. So I just wanted to mention this. My idea is perhaps to make an announcement in one of the issues and to contact a few people. But as I say again, if you know anybody who is interested, please have them contact me, and then we can start a discussion. And I want to also work with Leslie on this because it's really Leslie's journal. He was the founder, and I want to make sure that this has a future. So, with that, I want to end it. I wanted to show some of the issues. Is it really good? Let's see what we have. This is for Bass. This is the upcoming issue. It's not published yet. It's in the printers. And this, let's see, can you go down page? I just wanted to mention here that Bass Jacobs, one of our speakers, who is speaking on the theories of K. Paul Johnson. His article is going to appear in the next issue. It should be ready when I return and will be mailed out. For those of you who want copies, it's going to be online. Let me know. I'm not going to charge you, I'll just give it to you. But this is the contents of it. And this is the first article on the theories of Johnson and the reaction. And I think it's very important. We'll talk a little bit more about this when the paper comes up, when Bass gives it. But it created and still creates controversy amongst a number of individuals. So that's the upcoming issue. I mentioned the February 17th letter of Madame Blavatsky to J.R. Skinner. It's in this issue. This picture came out of the Andover Harvard Theological Library. It was in the collection. The Skinner collection, by the way, has a number of very important letters besides Blavatsky's. And it was here, if you want to go to the table of contents, 2 pages there, it is here that we have a full analysis of it. It was initiated by Jeff Lavoie, who happens to be a fellow student with Tim Rudberg when they were PhD candidates. Also, articles on Skinner, the only article on Skinner that exists that I know of, by Jerry Hedger Akins. And I tried to discuss how Blavatsky met Skinner. And again, there are some very important issues that I want to discuss in a couple of days' time. I won't do it here. But this was the beginning. This was the 36-page letter, probably the longest letter that she wrote, to a person that she considered almost an equal to her. She claimed that he had discovered 2 of the 7 keys. And Skinner was, in fact, an expert in gematria as well as in Hebrew. And so he was very much respected by Blavatsky. And I think it needs to be said that Skinner may have had more influence on the society than we suspected. So this is the first piece of evidence. The second piece will be the letter that will be published, I hope, in the numbers 3 and 4 of volume 20. And again, there are problems with that letter as far as reading it, but I think it's something that has to be printed no matter what the condition. Now, besides Theosophical History, I have a series of papers that are called occasional papers. These are too long to be put into the journal. And this upcoming issue goes back to Point Loma. Now, if you have any questions about the contribution of the Theosophical Society to general society, go to this journal, because the Theosophical Society was defined the cultural life of San Diego under Catherine Tingley in the first decades of the 20th century. And for the first time, the son of Emmett Small was the head of Point Loma Productions, Publications. Emmett Small had bequeathed a number of items, as also the founder of Point Loma Publications, which was an offshoot of the Tingley organization, to the museums and the Historical Society of San Diego. And all of these items were put on display, and they're still on display in San Diego. And what Ken did was to collect them, photograph them, write up articles on the individual members, including perhaps the most famous of the artists, Reginald Mitchell. And so we have something like 250 pages of documents and other items in this. It's equivalent to a catalog. And so I'm hoping to have this published by the time of the AAR meeting in November. So again, if anybody is interested, you want to go down a few pages? And, you can see I'm still working on it. But I wanted to show you some pictures. This is a good one. This is a little collage of pictures dating back to around 1903 or so, and moving up to the time of her death. Point Loma was a very, very beautiful site, and was a Theosophical colony from 1897, when it officially was founded, to 1942. And then after that, they moved up to Covina in Los Angeles County, and then had to move to Altadena, where they are today. And if you ask me where the Covina school was, it's now under the San Diego Freeway. So it disappeared.
Not the, you mean the San Bernardino Freeway?
San Bernardino Freeway, that's where it is. So the whole school was taken down and they put a freeway with it. That's California freeway. Okay, so that just gives you an idea of this particular issue. Moving on to another issue that I'm planning, and this one is going to take a lot of work, number 16. 16, super. Yeah, that's the one. This one I'm working on right now is concentrates on perhaps the most famous of the artists. And again, I'm doing a lot of work because the author is Portuguese and his English is not the best, so I have to kind of rewrite it. But he's talking about the life of Reginald Mitchell. And he has collected about, I reckon, about 300 samples of Mitchell's works. And again, if you have any knowledge of Reginald Mitchell, he's famous for his temple doors, for the famous paintings of the path. And if you want to go down a few pages, we'll see if we can get some pictures of it. Oh, maybe this doesn't have the pictures. Okay. Yeah. Here's another thing about the publication. It's a little bit complicated because we have to go from either Word or Pages into InDesign, and when you do that, you have to take out all the photos and then reinsert them. So that's the problem on that. So this is the next one. This will be, I think, the most comprehensive study of Reginald Mitchell in print once this comes out, and I'm hoping the numbers here are really the numbers of the paintings that are going to be inserted. So we're getting ready for that. I'm going to go to 17. Something that you might be familiar with. I'm in contact and have been in contact with Nicholas Van Gelder, whose name you may know. The Van Gelder family of Indonesia, Australia, very well known. Dora Kunz was the past president of the American section. She was a Van Gelder. Nicholas is a relative. And he produced already one work, which I'll show you, on the manor. The manor is the mansion in Sydney that became the headquarters of the society in Australia. Now he's working on a text on the 1905-1906 tour that Leadbeater took around the world, if you want to go down a few pages. So he calls it Around the World with C.W. Well, and gives a description of what occurred, and of course some of the old pictures. And one thing about Nicholas is that he has pictures in his own collection that have never been published. And so we're going to try to include some of these. And so this is one of them. If you want to continue down. And what is of interest is that Leadbeater went around the world, including Hawaii. And since I studied in Hawaii, this is most interesting. There was a presence in Oahu of the Theosophical Society, and so it was very prosperous, apparently, and he was there. And so here we have some of the old photos of his trip. So that's going to be the next one. I'm hoping maybe in about 2 years I can get this out. And this one is volume 18, numbers 3 and 4. There was an article which had to do with a topic in Central America and the importance of Krishnamurti there. And so this is one of those portraits by a Central American artist. And if you want to go down to the page, the contents, this will give you an idea. By the way, this has the report of the one of the past Theosophical History conferences, the last one. And also in this issue, talking about old documents, one is called Theosophical Thanks. This is very important because this happens to be the third article that was not too well known by Rawson, who knew Blavatsky prior to 1875, going back to the 1850s, and what he remembered about him. Here he gives a rather critical examination of a visit by Alcott around 1890 or thereabouts. And then John Patrick Devaney, who has an article here on Albert Rawson and how he was viewed by some. And the article is very, very interesting. The title tells it all about his character. And so Rawson was a figure that is mentioned quite often by Alcott, but a little bit disreputable. And by the way, another person who has been a big help to the journal is Massimo Introvigne, who you may know, and here he has an article on the artist Delvey. 15 years. This is a slightly older, volume 17, number 1, if you like the contact page. Dr. Goodrick Clark is most of you know, died a few years back, and there was a little memorial to him. Nicholas, I knew well before he became the head of the School of Exeter in Western esotericism, and I always knew him as a rather vivacious individual, a very, very friendly person. And it was really unfortunate that he died so young, back in 2012.
How old was he?
59. So not too old. And Erica, your article,
Yes,
I wanted to include.
thank you.
This is on the wreck of the ammonia. So I think Erica has some good points that she wants to, and also some interesting pictures as well. So, and then of course Jocelyn has his, every once in a while he publishes still. And this is more recent. I wanted to introduce, there was some talk about the relationship of the spiritualists with the Theosophical Society. Jeff Lavoie, remember, had a book, produced a book suggesting that the Theosophical Society was part of the spiritualist movement. That was his argument. And I wanted to do a little bit more research. There are articles hidden in these journals. If you go online, they are available. But William Harrison was the editor, and he had written on the relationship of the two. But I was interested more in his take on the Himalayan brothers, especially now we're talking more and more about who these masters are. He had his own take on it. And then also Barry Loft, who is the librarian still, is he? Oh, no, he's the librarian of SPR, is it? No.
Barry Loft, I think the library question here is the Yarka Library.
Oh, yes,
John
yes, yes.
Yarka's
The
library.
Yarka
Yeah,
Library,
yeah.
that's right. Yeah, from the Yarka Library, he wrote this account of the Oriental Order of Sanskrit, Shika and the Satbhai. So that's, and of course, Mark Demarest, a person who you may or may not know. He's the person who put together the IAPSOP website. That's the website with all of the spiritualist and theosophical journals that he can get his hands on. And there's hundreds of them online. It's a massive site. He is the one who's really in charge. And the person who helps him is John Devaney. And I think, has made research much easier, much more accessible because of his work. And so he has his own blog, but he wanted to write something about Harrison. So if you're interested in who this person was, he had a great influence on spiritualism during the 1860s, 70s, 80s. And Mark does a good job on that. So this gives you an idea of the contents. So I was interested in people, on documents, on movements. That's what I'm interested in. So whoever takes over may want to continue or may want to move in different directions. That's quite all right. Do whatever you want.